leave that there. Okay, terrific. Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started now. Today's session is on the Azerbaijani Laundromat, which we're looking at as a case study as far as investigative journalists and advocates partnering in creative ways to really accelerate impact. I'm Camille Ice. I'm the Director of Partnerships at OCCRP, which is the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. And we're just going to start off today. Oh, sure? Okay, better? Okay. Sorry. I'm just going to kick us off today. For those of you, some of you may be more or less familiar with this case, just quickly talking about what it is and why we're focused on it today. So first of all, the Azerbaijani Laundromat was a $2.9 billion slush fund or money laundering operation orchestrated by affiliates of the Aliyev regime in Azerbaijan, the country's largest bank, operated through 4 shell companies in the UK and enabled by major financial players in the European financial system like Danske Bank. This resulted in both money laundering and reputation laundering, as that money was used to pay off those responsible for assessing the country's human rights record in the Council of Europe. So we're looking at this case today for a couple of reasons. First of all, because it so clearly illustrates the way the global financial system and legal loopholes can be used by a corrupt regime to move money and to influence international opinion through these financial channels, through legal loopholes, with real-world human rights ramifications. Second of all, we're looking at it because it's one of the major investigations of a relatively new initiative called the Global Anti-Corruption Consortium, with the unfortunate acronym of GACC. And that really is an initiative that was kicked off 2 years ago, marking the first global partnership between a global network of investigative journalists and a global network of anti-corruption advocates, OCCRP and Transparency International. I was working on the policy side of these issues at the time, and the thinking was really twofold in getting that off the ground. First of all, that so much of the government work on anti-corruption really focuses on country capacity, on the justice sector, on law enforcement, and on a country's ability to respond. We know, however, that as important as that is, corruption is inherently cross-border. It is global. It crosses borders in cases where law enforcement, in fact, often cannot. Second, there's the issue that on the other side, if you will, among corrupt officials, media tycoons, transnational criminal networks, there is a very high level of organization. And on the other hand, we have investigative journalists who dig very deep and have access to information that can prove corruption. We have advocates who are similarly doing in-house investigations, but have a different mandate in terms of being able to package that information. And then law enforcement also doing their own investigations, all working in silos. And the escalation of these issues, the ramifications of corruption around the world, are so great that we need to think creatively about how we can allow each of these communities to really work in their lanes, pursue their missions, but have greater impact as a result of this work. Third, we would be remiss today, I think, if we didn't address this wider issue of impunity and what it means with the world all paying attention now in the case of Jamal Khashoggi, when governments are not looking to protect journalists and in fact are committing these human rights abuses in the first place. So we're really lucky, I think, today to have this conversation, to have a frank conversation with a panel of individuals who are really working on the front lines of these issues. I'm going to quickly introduce the panel and note that we're going to have to wrap up a little early today, around 1:30, 1:40, as unfortunately several of us on the panel have to get very quickly to another meeting. So with that, I'm going to hop right into this. And first, to my left, we have Paul Radu, who is the Executive Director and co-founder of OCCRP. Paul is a well-known investigative reporter and editor himself, who has been at the forefront of OCCRP's global expansion and also spearheading global investigations like the Azerbaijani Laundromat. Up on the screen here, we are very fortunate to have Khadija Ismailova, who needs no introduction with this audience likely, Khadija is an award-winning investigative journalist who has covered corruption at the highest levels, including in her own country of Azerbaijan, and who was instrumental in this investigation as well. Here to my right, we have Casey Kelso, who leads the advocacy work for the GACC on TI's side, and really helped spearhead this initiative and pushing on direct engagement with the Council of Europe and others as a result of this investigation, and he'll be able to speak to us about that and the wider initiative. Finally, we're lucky to have Ilya Shumanov here over to my left. Ilya is the Deputy Director of TI Russia and actually helps bring a wider perspective to cases like this and the kind of work as he works on both the investigations in-house from the civil society side and also the advocacy side. And can talk to us a bit about working in other restrictive environments. So with that, we'll kick off. I'm going to ask Paul to start us off here. Just by starting, tell us a little bit about how this project really got off the ground. How do you pursue a global investigation like this? And we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Camille. Hi, everybody. So the Azerbaijani Laundromat was the outcome of about 10 years of work. So a little bit more than 10 years ago, together with Khadija and my colleagues at OCCRP, what we realized was that we were investigating the same thing over and over again. And obviously we were focused on organized crime and corruption. But the schemes were always similar across frontiers. So this begged the question, what's going on? This is how we started to see this criminal infrastructure. This infrastructure that allowed criminals to launder money across borders. And we started in about 2010 with a project called Offer Crime Inc. And what we saw was amazing. We saw many criminal groups, including Mexican drug cartels, rogue governments, Iran trying to bypass sanctions, using one single bank account to launder money through one single bank in Latvia. That was the beginning, of what we unveiled later, this complex Tor-like system that was designed to help oligarchs, kleptocrats, mafias, organized crime groups to launder their crime proceeds. So we started working in 2010, and we moved to 2014 when we exposed one of the largest schemes when it comes to money laundering, to worldwide money laundering, and we dubbed this the Russian Laundromat. This was more than 20 billion worth of money laundering in US dollars. It involved banks, again, in Eastern Europe, but the money spilled all over the world. And it kind of caught in this scheme, some of the biggest banks, you name them, from Deutsche Bank to HSBC to the Bank of New York, lots of banks. So this was, back in 2014, was a serious alarm signal. It was like this coalition of criminals that worked together in order to launder their money at a very low cost. So if you look back in time, money laundering was very costly. The Italian traditional mafias, Cosa Nostra, Camorra, used to pay up to 25% of the crime proceeds in the process of laundering their money. Now, about more than 10 years ago, this platform was created that allowed these same criminal groups plus dirty politicians to launder their money at less than 1% of the total amount that they gained. So this was, wholesale money laundering. So I bet you some of you are using VPNs that go through many proxies and Tor networks, Tor type of networks. Activists always do this, and journalists alike. So this is what the criminals created as well, except in the financial world and using some of the biggest banks in the world. So now, 2014, we exposed this Russian Laundromat. We moved forward, and as a result of that investigation, the law enforcement in a few countries started their own work. And it went on until up to the end of 2016, the beginning of 2017, where these law enforcement agencies noted something interesting. the fact that they couldn't advance with their investigation. And that was due to various reasons. Among them, central was the fact that Russia was not cooperating, and a lot of the money came out of Russia and the former Soviet republics. So the Russians sent FSB agents, to various countries to gather the information about the Russian laundromat, but they never returned the favor, although they said, that they're part of the investigation. So in about 2017, several law enforcement agencies came back to us, to the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, saying, look guys, you started this, you put this out in the open, now we can't continue working on this because there's all these hiccups, so we'll give you the data. So they handed us a lot of the banking data that they amassed as their investigative process. So this enabled us last year to continue working and expose again the Russian laundromat, but this time with beneficiaries of the money much deeper than we did before. After we exposed this in the spring of last year, people started trusting us and trusting our partners. And I should say that both the Russian laundromat and the Azerbaijani laundromat was work between many journalists and many media organizations. So after we exposed the Russian laundromat last year, our colleagues, our team members, Berlingske, from here in Denmark, got a new data set. This time it was 4 bank accounts belonging to these 4 British companies. And these companies were involved in laundering about $2.9 billion US. Most of the money coming out of Azerbaijan. And this is how it started. We started with infrastructure and we got to the Azerbaijani Laundromat. What was interesting, and I'll finish with this at this point, is that we saw many intersections between the Azerbaijani Laundromat and the Russian Laundromat. Same companies, same criminal groups, using both platforms. I'll give the example of Iran. Iran, for instance, in 2012, the Ayatollah of Iran declared this financial jihad. This is out in the open, and there were people coming to the help, to the aid of Iran, proposing all sorts of criminal schemes to launder money, to bring hard currency into Iran. And they used both the Azerbaijani and the Russian laundromat. So this is, really is, it's a huge financial conspiracy among the criminals. And this is how we got to the Azerbaijani laundromat and to the fact that, criminal groups, and rogue governments and people who, are powerful in their countries and like to put, activists and journalists behind bars, are using the same tools over and over again. And unfortunately, we can't do much about it unless banks, big banks in the world start acting on it. And because as you saw here in Denmark, Danske Bank was a big part of this, was central to this scheme. But it's not just Danske Bank, all these smaller banks from Eastern Europe, from Russia, from Moldova, from Latvia, had corresponding bank accounts with much larger banks that didn't do their work, didn't do their due diligence, didn't do their know your customer, and know your customer's customer, and so on. So it's really a systemic failure from the side of the banks.
Great, thanks, Paul. I want to turn to Khadija now to talk a little bit more in terms of talk about the source of the money a bit. Where did this money all come from, and more specifically, who was it benefiting? From where you're sitting under travel ban, what were the wider ramifications as well for the human rights situation in your country and otherwise?
Yes. Thank you for the question. Angel? Hello?
Yes.
Hello,
Yes,
we have you.
Yeah. So, yeah, the Azerbaijani Laundromat actually answered some of the questions that have been raised years ago, like where the money go to and how do they manage to take the money out. So we could see how the well-known scheme of money laundering had been used also by Azerbaijani oligarchs. And now I want to go what exactly had been revealed by Azerbaijani Laundromat. One of the scandals was related to the son of the Vice Prime Minister of Azerbaijan. The Vice Prime Minister, Mr. Yakup Eyubov, whose who has 3 sons. One of them is ambassador to EU till last week. Another one was just a businessman. And his son received several $1 million to his accounts in offshore companies and in Hungary from Rosoboronexport. Rosoboronexport is Russian arm dealer. It wouldn't be suspicious if his prime minister would not be the key negotiator in arm deals between Azerbaijan and Russia. So he was negotiating the arm deal, and several months later, his son received several $1 million in his accounts in offshores and Hungary. So another scandal was related to the money that had been taken from the country by one company, which is called Pak Telecom LLC. It's limited liability company, and it had one account in the bank of the country, International Bank of Azerbaijan, and they managed in just several months, they managed to transfer $1.4 billion from the country through this scheme of money laundering. And there was no explanation to this. There was no no export. This company had not known as a big taxpayer. This company had not been known as a largest importer or exporter. So you wouldn't explain anything with this. And then there was another scandal related to Council of Europe. And it turned out that the money that had been transferred by this company actually were used to pay off services of European politicians, members of Parliamentary Assembly in Council of Europe, so they voted down the critical reports about the Azerbaijani government. So how this company was related to Azerbaijani government, you would ask, and we discovered that link as well. Mr. Rasim Asadov, the owner of he is a business partner of the First Lady's cousin, and he's very close to the First Family. So they had official co-ownership of the company in Austria and other countries, but also that he's very close to the family. So these people and this investigation on corruption in Council of Europe had been carried out by many years by the civil society organizations and journalists separately, and then some of the questions had been answered by Azerbaijani Laundromat. There were other scandals also. One of the account owners transfers through this bank system, like shadowy bank system, was the family that belongs to Anti-Corruption Commission chief. So the deputy head of Anti-Corruption Commission in prosecutor's office, the guy who's supposed to be fighting corruption, he's $millions of dollars, unexplained one, from Azerbaijan to different accounts around the world using this shadowy system. Also, there were money transferred for buying luxury goods or paying services, medical bills of the ministers of different oligarchs. So these stories in Azerbaijani Laundromat explained how these schemes are being used as an extension to the local corrupt system and help the local corrupt system to launder the money stolen from the public of Azerbaijan. Another story that had been revealed in that laundromat was related to Director General of UNESCO, the United Nations Science and Culture, Education, Science and Culture Organization. So Madam Irina Volkova, she's a very close friend to our She's friendly with our first lady. She's been with flattering speeches about Azerbaijani president, despite poor human rights record, despite poor record with freedom of speech. And in 2014, just before my arrest, we signed a common letter to Irina Bokova, asked her to raise her voice against the arrest of journalists in Azerbaijan and to raise her voice against the oppression of journalists in Azerbaijan. There was no reaction from Irina Bokova. Irina Bokova was famous in Azerbaijan because she used to come to celebrate festivals. She used to come to spend holidays and stay here for music festivals. But she has never been into the critical issues. So we asked her to raise her voice. No response had come from UNESCO Director General, although this was her primary responsibility. She's supposed to do that. And then there were other issues related to destruction of cultural heritage by the first family because they built the hotel on the place of the ancient city wall. They destroyed the city wall to build their hotel, and other crimes against the cultural heritage. So she's been receiving all these requests to raise her voice, but she has never responded. She has never reacted to, she has never criticized the Azerbaijani government. And Azerbaijani Laundromat explained us the possible reason for that. Her husband was actually on the payroll of the Ministry of Emergency of Azerbaijan. It's Minister of Emergency, powerful persons in Azerbaijani government, and he's basically the most wealthy man after the president in the country. So he owns. We conducted a lot of investigations about his companies and his businesses. Daphne Caruana Galizia has also revealed his dirty business agency, Ministry of Emergency of Azerbaijan, has paid husband of UNESCO Director General a generous amount, and he explained that he was consulting Ministry of Emergency regarding the flood in Kura River. So they even, while we were doing the investigation, journalists involved in the investigative team received a Azerbaijani company that allegedly hired Mr. Khalid Mitrov, the husband of UNESCO Director General. And the letter was explaining that there were work done, contracted by Ministry of Emergency, and they used the services of Khalid Mitrov as a consultant. It was a competitive process, and it was a very useful work that he has done. This letter came to the investigative journalists as a response to all allegations about the corruption. And later we found the guy who allegedly sent the letter. He had never sent the letter. He was basically a fake director for the fake company that was siphoning the public money under the project that had never been implemented. And so we know how Azerbaijani government is famous, like ministries are famous with siphoning.
Okay.
Khadija,
You're in and out a bit, but yes, we are here. And that's actually a great point. Maybe to turn over to Casey. Thank you for all of that. In terms of this wider practice, but all of these stories that really brought a number of these mechanisms to light. I want to turn now to Casey to ask a little bit about with some of this being old news, some of it being a lot of new news and new evidence, if you will. How did you guys as advocates go about in terms of having a partnership with investigative journalists to really take action on this case in ways that you weren't able to perhaps before?
Great, thank you, Camille. We were excited when we were approached by the OCCRP that said we had a major data dump, but they would not tell us what it was about. That was one of the issues that came up. It was a drip feed that for a long time we didn't know it was a Danish bank. We knew that there was certain transactions that they had. We knew enough that both the United Kingdom and the Czech Republic chapters were brought to Berlin. We found an inside room, so there was not a chance of being monitored from outside the building. And we sat down with Paul and his the OCCRP partner in Czech Republic, and we talked through then what were the mechanics of what was going on. And I think for me, that was one of the most gratifying things. That I don't know where you were when the Panama Papers broke, but I was at home and I heard that something was happening, but I woke up and I didn't know what was going on. And I had to quickly come up within an hour or two to figure out what was TI's reaction to this. So for the first time, we didn't have to wake up the next day and have a story break. We actually were in the middle of it and say, not all of it, we didn't know all the information. They were rather closed-mouthed about it for security reasons, for Khadijah's security as well as others. But we had enough that we could start putting together, let's get something on correspondence banking. What is our policy on correspondence banking? How does money flows work? The UK said, how about Scottish LLPs? We've been watching that. It looks like the data is identifying Scottish LLPs that were used, that went then as clients through this Estonian branch of the Danske Bank. Let's work up our policies on the Scottish LLPs. The Czech Republic then started looking into the real estate deals that were going on in their country. And we had something ready. And the help desk that we had, shout out to the help desk, prepared a 20-page backgrounder on Azerbaijan human rights violations, so we could put it into the context of what was going on in that country itself and what was the victims, what were the victims of grand corruption, what was happening in Azerbaijan and the repression. So we had everything prepared at that point then, so when the launch came out, we were able to come out and start talking, what are the clear responses? This story, this data, what does it tell us about what needs to happen, what needs to be changed? We reached out in a second group of chapters to Norway and Sweden and Finland and Denmark, as well as Germany, for the work that we were doing as an advocacy organization wasn't being done out of Berlin per se. It was these chapters that had to then find local consequences. One of the best ones was the Council of Europe. We'd already joined with the European Stability Initiative to try to push on a corruption inquiry, because it was already known that there was vote rigging around the Azerbaijan reviews of human rights. So as we pushed forward, it became sharper then to be able to say, all our chapters write into your Council of Europe delegate, and I stayed up until midnight, 1 in the morning. I put down every last one of their email addresses, and then we had a facility of all our chapters and the public writing in and saying, what the hell is going on? Here's what they just published. What does this mean for you? Are you corrupt? Will you then cooperate with any inquiry? And we got responses back within a day or so. The German delegations came right back and said, let's meet, let's talk about this. Of course, we're not corrupt. We will cooperate with any sort of inquiry that's going on. And that happened again and again in France, in Estonia, in Serbia, in Ireland. Why the Irish? They were not involved or not identified, but the Irish got very exercised and wanted to send someone over to Berlin to talk about this from their delegation, their parliamentarians. So we had an immediate response with concrete, evidence-based advocacy that gets people to get traction. What were the results then? The inquiry came out earlier this year in March and was able to identify and name people who were part of corruptive activities. They were able to identify who handed out the brown envelopes in the Council of Europe to buy off the votes to make sure that Azerbaijan was not going to be censured. Who was, at the beginning, it became clear then from the beginning that the president of the Council of Europe, a Spaniard, Mr. Agremont, actually doctored some of the reports and softened the criticism. Something that was known by people, but they couldn't demonstrate it. Because of the second follow-on inquiry, we were able to get that information, and from there we were able to say, now you have to go to the national level, and that's where we are now. 1 year later, national prosecution. So Karen Strenz in Germany is in the subject of an ethics investigation now. We want her out of the parliament. We have Finnish parliamentarians that took money, and we can demonstrate here is the amount that they took. Norwegians, Spanish, the Spanish delegation was well known to be documented by the Council of Europe, the 3-panel judges that did their own inquiry. They can demonstrate that they did take money, and therefore they have to suffer the consequences. Council of Europe can't do it. They banned these people for life. What has to happen now is the criminal consequences. And out of that then came policy change as well. Rather than Transparency International is looking for, how do we not just do putting people behind bars, what is the larger policy consequences? So Scottish LLPs are now out. The UK Parliament actually adopted that. They're adopting their own code of conduct for parliamentarians after the UK chapter was able to name who was taking the Azerbaijan money, who attended the latest junket over to Baku to visit the government, who was involved in some of the different receiving gifts or bribes. So it was a win-win situation that by using this information, it wasn't a story that would be dead in the water after a month or so. After Donald Trump says another stupid thing and the news cycle moves on, people didn't have to forget about it, but we had advocates and chapters that were able to take the story and keep it going and inspire further inquiries, further prosecutions, further action.
That's great. I think that's actually, just before we turn to Ilya, I want to go back actually to Khadija and Paul, just to ask a little bit about, Casey's laid out what a difference it made for them as an advocacy organization to be able to hit the ground running. But I'd love to hear more from you, Khadija, and Paul as reporters who were covering this investigation. What a difference it made to have this partnership on your side for the work that you are doing now on this case, but also more broadly, and also Paul on the financial system. So Khadija, I'll turn to you first.
Yeah, it had a great impact, and I would say it was the first time in my career when I was seeing an impact of my investigative reporting. Thanks to the advocacy and thanks to the international impact we had. Of course, nobody had been charged or punished in Azerbaijan, but Azerbaijani government's partners in Council of Europe, for example, they had to resign from their positions. And it turned out that talking to corrupt politicians became a kind of bad thing in Council of Europe. So it turned out that Azerbaijani government was no more able to silence any critical report in Council of Europe with their money. That was an impact, and we saw that an impact during the election observation mission, because basically everyone who came for election observation mission during the official delegations of Parliamentary Assembly and OSCE, they were basically trying to make sure that they had no unofficial contacts with the Azerbaijani government. So they were trying to make us sure that they didn't receive any money or any gifts from Azerbaijani government, because that was the usual practice before, and I think this investigation had stopped that practice, at least for a while. And then we saw the Council of Europe acting upon the results of an investigation. This investigation had been referred to in their findings and in their own investigation of corruption inside the Parliamentary Assembly. Several people had to step down, several people, former politicians, they were ousted from Parliamentary Assembly. They are banned from entering into Parliamentary Assembly premises. So this is the result that we would never imagine to see before in Azerbaijan. If it wouldn't be an international Consortium, if it wouldn't be an international partnership, and if it wouldn't be journalists together with advocacy activists acting together, we wouldn't see that. But that's not all. Also, we have seen later British government and other governments acting more responsibly in finding the root of the money, what they call unexplained wealth. Countries. And last week, 2 weeks ago, there was a big scandal with the former International Bank of Azerbaijan chairman's wife spending 16 million pounds in Harrods in the United Kingdom, and all of her companies and jets and property found and now being questioned by British authorities regarding unexplained wealth. So her husband is former official. I have investigated his corruption back in 2010. We waited for 5 years before Azerbaijani government finds it necessary to investigate on its own. He has been arrested. Before this scandal had erupted with Azerbaijani Laundromat. But now British authorities are questioning the unexplained wealth. And we are still waiting for Azerbaijani president's daughter's unexplained wealth being questioned by British authorities. We are yet to hear about our different ministers who are still in the office. Their siblings are being questioned for their unexplained wealth. And the impact of Azerbaijani Laundromat makes us very optimistic regarding this. So we believe these days are coming, and we are yet to see those days when people in the office in countries like Azerbaijan will be questioned for their unexplained wealth. So it will be the best days of the world will come when the democracies will start questioning unexplained wealth before revolutions or any political changes happen in their own country, in the autocracies. So we shouldn't wait the government change in Azerbaijan before starting questioning the president's wealth invested in other countries. So their corruption, their corrupt money. So we are yet to see more impact in that term. And also, another impact is the world is more aware about political problems and human rights issues in Azerbaijan. There is more awareness about the political prisoners issues in Azerbaijan, because that was an issue that Azerbaijani government was trying to silence in Council of Europe. So we have now.
Okay. We've heard you till now, Khadija. Hopefully you can hear, and you'll be back on in a second. I'm going to give Paul the mic for 1 second to quickly respond to that and talk a little bit about the financial side. Hopefully you can hear me. Thank you for all of that. It's tremendously important.
I'll just add to Khadija's words that once you understand how criminals work, how organized crime works, how corrupt government work, you see that their strength is the ability to operate across borders. But that is also their weakness. So when you assemble teams, when you work across countries with lots of media organizations and with DI, what you do is you attack the criminal networks at their weakest points. Now, this always grows. So when we first published, I think it was on September 4th last year, the Azerbaijani Laundromat, we did not expect such an outcome, such a fast, quick outcome, And this was, of course, the work of TI that contributed to this. But what we found as the weakest point, in all these structures that were put together by the Azerbaijani government to launder their money, were the banks. The banks had to react after our expose. So there was, Danske Bank central to this, and there were, dozens, maybe hundreds of other banks involved. And look, I mean, these banks, you know, now some of them claim that, look, you know, our subsidiary in Estonia, you know, was kind of isolated from the main structure because we didn't quite understand Russian. That's a very lame excuse because, I mean, first of all, when you look at, there's just 4 companies, right, involved in the Azerbaijani Laundromat. Now, one of them that wired millions in billions in this system was owned itself by a taxi driver in Baku, you know, who was a poor guy who, you know, wears flip-flops while, you know, walking downtown Baku. You know, he never saw millions, he never saw thousands, you know, of dollars, and we're talking about billions, you know. So it was an easy task from the side of the banks to actually identify that something, you know, that was not good was going on, and it went on for years. So now, after exposing this system together with TI, we raised the profile not only of OCCRP, but the other media involved, and I hope TI as well. And this led to new reporting, to new data coming our way. So this is work in progress right now. And I just want to praise the work done here in Denmark by Berlingske, our main partner in the Azerbaijani Laundromat, who continued, you know, the reporting on Danske Bank. And this led to Danske Bank admitting that it's not just a 2.9 billion, you know, it's a lot more money that was possibly laundered through their branch in Estonia. So all this is work in progress, and it's journalists working together with activists in a way that is really, really efficient.
Great, thanks, Paul. So now, just having heard a lot about this case and how journalists and advocates have worked together in different ways, I want to turn over to Ilya, moving away from Azerbaijan for a second, to turn to the case and doing this kind of work in Russia, where clear paths to prosecution are not always there. I wanted to hear a little bit, you know, how have you creatively pursued local accountability from where you sit at TI Russia?
Thank you, Camila. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. And in fact, we were involved a little bit in Azerbaijani Laundromat, but not like you guys, because we are not in the epicenter of this. Yeah, but we try to advocate this issue, especially Khadija has already mentioned the Rosoboron expert. We sent an application to the Russian financial regulator and asked their reaction about the Azerbaijani Laundromat and correlation with Rosoboron expert, because it was mentioned in the report. It's only the one company from Russia was mentioned. And we received suddenly the very quick response from the financial regulator. He said that information about this investigation is classified. Yeah, that's all. Yeah, we have no answer from different institutions from Russia, and it was reaction, I think so, after 2 days from our request. Yeah, I think so that we have a lot of correlation with Azerbaijani Laundromat. We have our own investigation related to the Baltic states, and it's about money laundering. Mostly some of them are related to the fake export and fake import, and the joke that the same facilitators who was involved in Azerbaijani Laundromat in United Kingdom, in Latvia, are involved in our investigation as the same persons, the same companies, and the same facilitators. It's very interesting because, like Paul said, it's one circle of the people, and they're trying to benefit each other, and they don't care about the consequence of the doing. Yeah. Does anybody yesterday was in the session where the tax minister of Denmark speak? Oh, I think one person. Yeah.
No, a few persons.
Yeah, I have evidence. It's not my thinking. Yeah, Mr. Karsten Lauritsen, he told that he sends Christmas postcards to the main taxpayers every year. Annually, he said that he sent 20 Christmas postcards, and one of the panelists asked him, do he gonna send the postcard to the Danske Bank this year? And he thinking a couple of seconds, and he said, yeah, of course I will send it, and I will write a small, I don't know, small few words about the improving of the money laundering system. Yeah, it's kind of the reaction of the Minister of Taxation in Denmark. Yeah, actually, my team, we are doing the investigation and we're doing some advocacy. It's kind of the new challenges for transparency movement because, you know, we are mostly the advocacy team, but some of the chapters have the capacity to do some investigation. And of course, we are focusing on two main financial hubs. The first of all is the United Kingdom. It was mentioned previously a couple of times. And the second is the United States. The big money flows from Russia, from the Eastern Europe, then goes to the United States. And it's very tricky thing that we are speaking about the small Baltic states like facilitators, but the main goal of this money is not the Baltic states, it's the United Kingdom property and the United States, Miami and something like that. We have already published a number of investigations related to the properties in the United States, mostly in the Miami, when the Russian generals or former generals, they got the Miami property for the $50 million, or Russian state-owned, the head of the state-owned corporation bought $10 million property without any kind of earnings in Russia, and they do not hesitate to spend their money because they have a lot of facilitators, mostly the consulting agencies or the lawyers who are really involved in such process, but they are not very afraid of doing so because they are like I don't know how it's called, self-regulated organization. Yeah. And also we have a number of investigations related to the United Kingdom. For example, the head of the Russian state-owned corporation Roscosmos, Mr. Rogozin, and the deputy mayor of Moscow, Mr. Husnulin, who were involved in the number of corruption cases, and we found out these cases. And the tricky thing that we sent a number of applications to the government bodies, the National Crime Agency, Serious Fraud Office, and the FBI, and other organizations, but what do you think, how many answers were received from these bodies? No answers at all. Yeah, even the Baltic States regulator answered to us, but not the National Crime Agency or FBI. It's very interesting that maybe you know that David Cameron wrote a big op-ed in The Guardian in 2016, and he told that there is necessity of the political will, and we have the political will to do this, to fight against corruption. But in fact, we see that the organization like Transparency International, like Russian branch, sent a number of applications. There is no reaction from the government side. Yeah, I think that I will stop focusing on my topic. Maybe we'll speak about later. Yeah, but the last point I would like to highlight that it's very hard to do such investigation without the global support, especially without cooperation with the global investigative consortium or units like investigative journalists. And 2 days ago, Transparency International movement issued a big statement related to the situation with the killing of the journalist. It was the first one statement, and it's related to the last killings, and it's very awful situation. And I think so. The situation is more awful because we know only the part of the journalist, because number of journalists are not the part of your consortium or consortium of a big investigative group, but local journalists who died and who never be mentioned in the global voices like Transparency International. And I think so. It's our chance and big challenge for us to speak about this, to make some support for their families, and to, I don't know, to try to defend these journalists who stand in front of these global corruption issues.
Thank you, Ilya. And on that point, I just want to give Khadija a chance to weigh in on that issue as well. We're back with you, right? Okay, great. Just on this issue, both of the escalation around the murder of journalists, particularly over the last calendar year, 3 journalists murdered within the EU. It's itself, the recent horrific murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and this issue of governments being held accountable for coming to real conclusions, not just about who committed certain crimes, but also who's behind them. Just for wider issues like this, we want to devote most of the rest of the session to questions from the audience, and also getting into some of the mechanics, lessons learned in terms of partnerships like this. But before we get on to that, I think it's important to turn back to Khadija, who has been under arrest since 2014, and amazingly continues to do this work, continues to shine a light where it's needed, and some, international attention. Congratulations, Khadija, for your nomination for the TI Award. We hope that this kind of international recognition continues to support both you and the work. But to Ilya's point, there are tons of journalists out there who, because of lack of conclusion about what happened or the lack of international attention, we need to remember them and not forget. But if also I want to give you the chance to just weigh in on how it affects the work, yours, but also colleagues that you continue to work with in Azerbaijan and around the world.
I would also wish to thank everyone who raised their voice while I was written, and I hope the same voice will be raised for investigation of crimes against journalists worldwide, and to achieve the release of other journalists who are in prison, like my colleague.
Okay, she may come back. Hopefully she'll come back on the screen. But I'll just note also, we're talking about partnerships today, both between investigative journalists and advocates. But also want to mention one bright spot in an otherwise very dark year for press freedom. There's an investigation actually that OCCRP is releasing today with a number of other journalist outlets as part of the Daphne Project. And this idea of journalists collaborating when one is silenced, sending the message that it won't silence the story, it'll bring more attention to it. And this is an area where journalist collaboration, we hope to see more of this. OCCRP, has been actual advocate and practitioner of this kind of collaboration for the last decade or so, but it's more important than ever as the press lends its own voice, but needs, really political backing in terms of addressing these cases. So going back to the collaboration between journalists and advocates, I just want to ask also Paul and Casey to touch on some of the lessons learned, because this in no way is a traditional partnership. Journalists historically do not work with advocates. There's a real issue of editorial independence, and in terms of working with my colleagues over the last year or so, I've had the chance to hear personally what difference it's made for their reporting, but also how this is so context specific, what it means to work with a local chapter, the timing of when information is shared, and probably Paul and Casey have really been at the forefront of that, having to work through these, hiccups, real security concerns, how you pursue this. So before we open it up to the audience, the hope is that there are journalists and advocates out there among you who we can either reel in to be part of this effort, or hopefully can gain some experience, so you don't have to make some of the same mistakes, and we can help you achieve more impact. So why don't I turn to you, Casey?
Yeah, let's talk about mistakes. It's looking back over the last year and a half, there's lots of things that we're trying to do better. One of them I have to look over at Ilya, that is a story about Russian illicit financial flows. They say over 17 years, global financial integrity will say 210 billion has gone out of Russia. We didn't integrate Ilya well enough into that whole operation. We focused on the Council of Europe and what we thought was the key place where leverage could get further inquiries, but we didn't work with Ilya as much, and we're looking into ways in which we build some sort of center of competence where in the post-Soviet states and with Russia, there's some way that we can better coordinate on those stories, because there's a lot happening with Russian illicit financial flows. The relationships is another one where sometimes it clicked really well and it worked quite well. people started talking and had discussions, like Hungarians talking that they'd never even talked before. They felt they were rivals, and suddenly they had a modus vivendi to start to talk about a specific cooperation. Sometimes it didn't work as well. So I was in Riga, Paul, when Anushka was one of your top journalists who said, half my staff thinks this is unhygienic. I don't think I want to talk to NGOs. And the other half want impact and say, yes, yes, yes, this is the way that my story is actually going to have impact and it's going to work. And we'll see that it's going to have legs, it's going to come back, not next week, but next month and next year, we can see some results of my reporting. So there's still an issue over how far or how much do we cooperate while staying within our lanes. It's complicated by things, chapters like ILIA, where they have an investigative capacity, so they do both. They do the advocacy as well as the investigations, and we haven't quite figured out how to make sure we have both sides of the pie. Tunisia's another one, Guatemala's another, where they have the investigative capacity, but they also do the advocacy. What's the role of OCCRP in coming into that situation? And the final one is just legal, to give a shout out to the FBI. I can understand that with Ilya saying that sometimes it's a one-way street. We provide information back to the FBI or other places, and you don't hear back on what's going on. So, and sometimes for good reason. There's this issue of, as we've heard, asset dissipation. In 2 minutes, you can hit a button and you can move 100 million out to another account. Well, when we publish a story, and if we don't have the legal ducks in a row to be able to freeze that account quickly, then we've just tipped them off onto what's happening, and therefore that money's going to go quicker than it might have ordinarily been. By publishing, what's the timing by the time that we publish? Can we actually destroy a carefully crafted investigation by the FBI that's taken them years to put together in an instant? That money's gone and they won't be able to get it again. They won't be able to make their case. I turn over to Paul.
So, I mean, I'm very proud of our work, obviously, you know, the Laundromat and other works, you know, and all, but honestly, this is peanuts. I mean, what we're exposing, what we're able to investigate is peanuts. We're talking, you know, 20 billion, we're talking 3 billion, we're talking all this money, which seem like really high amounts. But in fact, you know, what's going on out there, you know, what the criminals are dealing with, it's a lot more. So we're able to see a fraction of that, you know. So this is the basis of this cooperation. This is not about competition, it's about us not seeing the whole picture, you know. We need to engage as many people as possible, as many journalists, as many activists as possible to try to expose a bit more for the public, because obviously we're doing this in the service of the public. And I think this is what we're building towards, and it's all, I mean, it's all a matter of trust. When we met last year in Berlin for the initial meeting, you know, of the Azerbaijani Laundromat, there was trust between us because we knew each other for a while, you know, but there was trust inside the room, you know, and the network is out there. Journalists are out there, you know, the activists are with chapters in the Czech Republic and in, you know, Azerbaijan and in other countries. So you need to build that trust across the network. And in my opinion, that can be only done by working together, you know. We built trust in OCCRP over a period of, you know, more than 10 years, you know, and now we have trust among journalists, you know, really good trust. But so I think, you know, this type of cooperation will only get better as we go, as we work more together. No. So there will always be hiccups, there will always be discussions, arguments, and we had plenty during the Azerbaijani Laundromat. There were, from the TI side, you know, there were lawyers, I won't name names here, who said, I want all the documents, you know, I want access to the records, I want, you know, and sure, they need that access, you know, to build their cases, you know, but at the same time, we need to respect our sources, you know, so, and to, you know, safeguard our sources. So it's a very fine line. So it's, you know, as Camille put it, as Casey put it, you know, it's different lanes, but on the same highway. And we need to build more of those lanes, you know, in order to get to the real highway where the criminals are rolling.
Great.
I'd like to add one thing.
Okay, then we'll turn it over for questions.
Yeah. I think that's only the one way how to build trust between journalists and NGOs is give more than take. And if you did this, I think so it's a breach for the trust, because in fact, and personal understanding and personal feeling of necessity that you're doing. Because, for example, the Daphne Caruana Galizia case and the Golden Visas case, it's not about the, I don't know, totally corruption in the Russian Federation, but we started this case after the killing of her, and we started to investigate this case and started to do our investigation related to Russia only because of the personal understanding of necessity of this, not about the process, we are not involving in such process, but we do and support this process because of the personal feeling and understanding of necessity. Yeah.
Great. So with that, we're going to kick off questions. Just a reminder that we have to wrap up about 1:30, 1:40. So you have a mic over there? Okay, great. If I can ask you to identify yourself, and if you have a question for anyone in particular, please let us know.
Okay, very quickly. My name is Frank Vogel. I was once a journalist looking into the mafia and the Vatican Bank building, the Watergate building in Washington, for example. But they kicked me out of journalism, so I became an advocate as a co-founder of Transparency International. Very simple question. The United States, Ilya's mentioned it. Where does the Azerbaijani Laundromat lead you into the US? And in that regard, we've learned from the Paul Manafort case a little bit about the system that can work. Do you see any parallels? Could you maybe name some of the lobbyists in Washington? Some of whom have already been named, by the way, and just what is happening, because I can't imagine that the Azerbaijanis did not want to improve their reputation in Washington and follow the Ukrainian lead. So perhaps you could expand on the US connection, which hasn't been mentioned so far.
Sure, we had a few stories on the US connection, because some of the money, some of the Azerbaijani Laundromat money went to the US and went to lobbyists in the US, went to lobbyists who organized, for instance, trips for US congressmen back to Azerbaijan. And one thing that politicians did with these trips was they endorsed the local government, although the local government was imprisoning Khadija, and many other activists, or worse, was killing, activists and journalists. So US congressmen, European politicians, went to Azerbaijan, sometimes they stated, during elections that the elections went fair and square, and all that. So they really contributed to the worsening of the situation. Now, I think Casey can talk more about this, but there's a case in progress in the US under FARA, with this that we're trying to ignite. Now, on the other topic, yes, it is the same system. We look at Paul Manafort, we look at all the other people that benefited from Eastern European money, Ukrainian, Russian, and yes, this is these are all laundromats. This is one and the same system. Well, I believe the Mueller investigation will be a turning point into all this. And we'll be able to see a bit more of the system that has been built over many years by kleptocrats that are trying hard right now to protect their interests through political means and through any other type of means.
Great. Sorry, mic's over here.
I can add.
Sure.
I can add to this that the Laundromat investigation has revealed two companies, Bob Lawrence and Associates and Renaissance Associates. These two companies had been in service for Azerbaijani government for a long time, and and also there was another one, Turquoise, the company called Turquoise that was arranging these trips for Congress people, and Laundromat revealed part of these payments. So it's not only lobbying activity that was questionable, but also the means of delivery of money that were questionable. And I think Azerbaijani connection of
Give it 1 second.
Considering the fact that the meeting at Trump Tower between Trump and the Russian, the Trump family member and Russian lobbyists had been arranged by agalarvs, the Azerbaijani oligarchs in Russia, and former husband of our president's daughter, who is still in friendly relations with the first family in Azerbaijan. I think this connection had been so far underestimated and should be more investigated further.
And just to add on Khadija's, since she mentioned the Trump Tower meeting, which is quite important right now in the current context, that story, the origin of that story is an OCCRP investigation. Back in 2012, when we were investigating the Magnitsky case, we exposed how some of the Magnitsky money was invested in real estate in Manhattan, New York. So that particular story, and the photos attached to that story became Exhibit A in this court case that was brought by US law enforcement in the state of New York. Hence, the company that was accused in that case, hired a lawyer who participated in a Trump meeting, in the Trump Tower meeting, and so on. So all this is, when you see the system and you expose it, the outcome will come over time. I mean, solid work is always rewarded.
Great, thanks. Next question. Great, thanks. Next question.
I'm Mehmet Hussein, Excel-based human rights activist. We also work on a few investigations right now, but I'm totally agree with Radu for what you recognize. This laundromat is only peanut, it's top of the iceberg. We checked investigative report by Council of Europe. It's covered few politicians, but I know personally dozens of politicians which is still not under investigation from Council of Europe member state. And the issue is, I now understand the reason why you're only able to cover, because what kind of difficulties we have for last 1 year. We try to ask member of states, leading member states of Council of Europe, guys, support Azerbaijani civil society for continue deeply investigate this Laundromat case. And any single EU member states, including US, Canada, supports this activities, our call to them. And now, just my recommendations. Yes, you have a success. It's a brave story, which is published and still republished until today. But for me, as I'm Azerbaijani civil rights activist, I'm living in exile. I lost my mother recently because my brother jailed. My brother also well-known investigative anti-corruption body in Azerbaijan. But I'm not agree with panelists for now we'll speak about issues with Azerbaijan more after Laundromat. Now we can't see this reaction, and we believe until Azerbaijani civil society don't have more institutional power to and other instrument to deeply investigate, we can't find any result. And now we, from exile, start to work with the institution which is stolen and help to stolen money like Danske Bank. We start to correspond with them, with Danske Bank leadership. We say them, guys, you make more than 150 million euros clean profit from these 3 billion, which is your help to my dictator stole for 2 years. Could you please return this money back to Azerbaijani civil society and investigative journalist community, for we are trying to investigate and fight against financial crimes around the world. And bank responded few letters to us. First of all, they don't want to meet with us. They just few times respond to our letter for years. We're thinking about framework to establish some kind of institution to spend and give this profit to this institute, like some kind of global fund to fight against financial crimes. And we're thinking about framework, but when we told them, for guys, you are not allowed thinking only about yourself, about framework, how to spend money which is stolen from prison.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who want to respond to you.
Yeah, let's take actions for return this stolen assets, not back to Azerbaijan as like UK administration say, for maybe we return back. Yesterday I met with head of the Anti-Corruption Bureau from UK, and we told them, for guys, if you return this money which is you confiscated from Zamira Gadjeva to Azerbaijan, to former her husband post Ilham Aliyev, which is most one of the corrupted guy in the world. It's shame on you to all your thanks.
Just a quick reply to say one of the things that we talked about, the different chapters that were involved. The one chapter that was not involved was the Azerbaijan chapter. We kept them entirely in the dark for their own safety, that they did not know what was going on. They had a general telegraph that something was coming up, but it was just too unsafe to involve and that's the nature of a network of chapters, is that sometimes, whether it's in a country where there's a hostile political environment, it would be easier to work on the outside than the inside. So.
Did you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, again, we need, this is a team effort, obviously, and we need to find new avenues. And indeed, I mean, we're discussing for a long time. I mean, OCCRP, for instance, contributed to the seizure and, of, I think more than $5 billion US dollars, worth of, seizures and all this by various governments. And none of that money goes to activists, back to activists or investigative reporters and all that. And I mean, we're dealing and we're exposing people, handling billions, while we're, I mean, we really don't have money to build our networks,
I would like to add. I think so that there is no way except returning money to the country. Because the STAR initiative, do you know the STAR initiative? It's World Bank initiative about stolen asset recovery, returning to the country. Maybe there is a way how to supervise for spending this money, including the civil society, maybe independent civil society institution, but the money have to be returned to the country. It's the main issue of the returning money.
It's government, not legitimate.
Yeah. Maybe it takes I don't know,
you
10 years.
No,
Maybe it takes 10 years, 20 years, but the money have to be returned to the country. For example, the bank accounts on the Swiss bank, they kept the money from, I don't know, some of the regimes for 20 years, and then they return this money to the country in this supervision of the civil society and independent international institutions. Yeah, but the main idea is returning money to the country. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, oops, turn it off. Just to add to that, I think you also are bringing to light, I mean, we talk about it sometimes as the resource asymmetry, and we focused in this discussion on more direct attacks on journalists or lack of protection for journalists in civil society. There's a lot of discussions at conferences like this about closing space. But the reality is that media ownership is also a huge part of this. We talk about certain governments using $1 billion to affect the media environment in their own countries, but also strategically across regions, which contributes to this very clear asymmetry when there's civil society and journalists working, on trying to hold power accountable. Your question about asset recovery, I think it's a discussion that's come up a number of times. In a number of these things, TI might want to think about holding a more focused discussion on this going forward, because I think there's increasing recognition about this asymmetry. It's also very complicated within governments and then globally, right? Because it's a global issue and there's jurisdictional issues. I would also add that there are, however, a number of people here from governments around the world who are working on these issues in their agencies who might be able to shed some light on how this works, because I think it's an issue that we'll continue to have to address, try to come up with solutions that also work for those agencies, that are doing this accountability work on the inside. So with that, we have about 15 minutes, 10-15 minutes left. So if we could take a few more questions, collect them all, and then give the panel an opportunity to respond. Jody.
Hey. Jody Vittori, Defense and Security Program. I wanted to understand a little bit more about the illicit financial flows and how this massive laundromat got started. Having looked at illicit financial flows before, there's a lot of models. Is there, like in some models, like the Irish Republican Army had like a corps of accountants that set everything up? Other places it's been states like in North Korea. Can you tell a little bit more? You talked about like the lawyers knew each other and stuff. How does that actually work? What does that underlying foundation that actually works? Does the state sponsor in a state office? How does because it's such an interesting, there's so many actors in so many countries. It's such an interesting foundation.
Right, so, I mean, in short, what you need is a crooked bank. And there's two ways to, take over a bank. You either set up a bank, which was the case in a few of the laundromat instances, or you take over shares in an existing bank. Most of the laundromats, when you look at them, is the banks then create the offshore companies. So it's not the clients that come with the offshore companies, it's the banks that already have these shell companies formed in various jurisdictions, Panama, BVI, whatever. And then when the client comes, they will offer the company with a bank account and plus a fraud manual. We identified fraud manuals that were issued by these banks. Now, what are these fraud manuals? PDFs where you find a set of instructions, such as don't say in your fake invoices that you're shipping fish if your company is not based near the sea. Don't send even numbers. Don't send 1 million. Break that 1 million in smaller amounts. Send money late on Friday afternoon, because that's when the compliance people in banks, won't pay attention. So there are clear instructions, down-to-earth instructions that are issued. So banks are central to this. But then the questions that comes next is like, okay, so you set up a bank that is completely crooked and you control it via offshores, via your direct ownership, whatever. But how do these banks have access to the international banking system? I can't just set up a small bank somewhere in Moldova, in Chisinau, and then be able to wire the money to the US. I need to open up a corresponding bank account with a larger bank that's needed. So this is where the inflection point is, because when you talk, and I talked to quite a few banks involved in the laundromat, and they said, look, we just didn't see it. The criminals were so smart. They used this store-like network, and there were zillions of transactions, and we couldn't track all those down. We filed lots of SARs, these suspicious activity reports, but we couldn't see the whole picture. When in fact, what they should have done was to look at the corresponding bank accounts. So, okay, if I go to a bank, I'll be asked a lot of information. I'll be asked for my ID, and all that. But if a bank goes to a bank to open up a bank account, why isn't the bank asked the same things? And this would have been easy to spot, the laundromats, in the sense that the banks involved with the laundromats had no clear beneficial ownership. They were owned, some of them were owned via offshores, where you could see proxies, people that owned, 1,000 companies at the same time, or were directors in a gazillion companies. So this could have been easily spotted by banks. It's not about trying to monitor, lots of transactions. It's about finding out who just opened up the bank account with you.
And I thought it was interesting, as you look at the Estonian branch and what's been coming out, 35% of the profits was coming from 8% of these Russian clients. They could identify it by nationality, so only 8% of the clients of this Estonian branch were there, but it generated 35% of their profits, and it was non-resident customers that did not live in Estonia. They were living abroad, so they had by nature then to create these shell companies. There was 3 different corresponding banks that severed relations with the Estonian branch because of that. So there's clear red flags that something was up, there's a lot of money going through there. In the current round that FATF is doing on banking, they say that of the 50 different the country assessments that they've done, no one is highly effective in actually coming through what they call outcome 7, which is effective actual enforcement of chasing down the money laundering and finding out is there effective sanctions. None of the 50 have ever been actively highly efficient in doing that sort of thing. So it's an area to look at. This new round is quite interesting that they've introduced a new criteria or variable of actual enforcement. Are they actually doing anything? nobody's doing that well. It's rather alarming to see.
And I think we have time for one more question if anyone else has something. Okay, with that, then I'm just going to quickly turn to the panel, see if there are any closing words from our panelists. Khadija on video, I'm glad to see her back. If there's anything you want to...
And at the end, I would like to thank all the anonymous reporters that worked on Laundromat project and all other collaborative projects of OCCRP. The reporters whose names are not, who are not using their own bylines when do the stories, and they cannot sign the stories with their names because of the threats, not only to them, but also to their family. In Azerbaijan, the government also uses pressure against the family members of journalists, and we have members of families of journalists in prison just because the government was not able to silence the journalist himself. So I would like to ask you in the panel and in the audience to applaud to those anonymous journalists for their indispensable work, for the work that they are doing, even doing and not claiming the credit for that. That's a big deal for the journalists, and they still work and they do the job, but they don't claim the credit for that because of the threats, but they still continue working. So please welcome their work with your applause.
Thank you, Khadija, and thank you to the other panelists. I think that's a really important note to finish on. And thank you to all of you and to TI for putting this together as we work together to continue to scale these efforts up, take them global, and protect the journalists and the frontline advocates who are out there doing this work every day. So thank you.
Əziz dostlar, bu videonu bəyənmisinizsə və bu videonu Azərbaycan dilli oxuculara tərcümə etmək istəyirsinizsə, xahiş edirik ki, YouTube-daki müvafiq funksiyadan yararlanıb, yəni videonu könüllü şəkildə subtitrlar vasitəsilə tərcümə edib, bu videonu tamaşaçılarımızın diqqətinə bir daha çatdırın. Çünki biz əminik ki, bu cür təşəbbüs təkcə İngilis dilli tamaşaçılarımıza yox, həm də Azərbaycan dilli tamaşaçılara antikorrupsiya mövzusunda məsələləri daha asan aşılamaq üçün böyük yardım edəcəkdir. Bir daha bu verilişə baxdığınız üçün təşəkkür edirik. Bu videonu bir daha baxıb və paylaşmağı da unutmayın. Kanalımıza da abunə unutmayın. Hər vaxtınız bizə xeyir olsun. Sağ olun. Gələn görüşlərə.